But you're married.
Yeah.
So walk me through the process of what it was like courting a Japanese woman as a black man in Japan.
All right. Well, I mean, with my wife, it was different because my wife had lived in the States before.
Got it. Okay.
So, and with a lot of the people, a lot of the foreigners that marry with Japanese women or foreign, women who marry with Japanese women, they marry the ones that have international experience.
Got it.
And they kind of already have a concept of how, how Americans are or how Canadians are or whatever. Right. So like my wife, she already speaks English. She's lived in the States before. She loves the States. For her, she likes it because there's no pressure. Because like I said, in Japan, social pressure is quite strong. Yeah, I mean, she always felt like there's a lot of pressure for her here in terms of how she has to behave and how she has to sit and how her makeup has to be done. So she likes going to the States because in America, man, you can go to the store in your pajamas and nobody cares.
I don't know if I agree with that. I agree. What you said is correct. I don't know if I agree with the. So all right. So people.
But you know what?
People.
I think.
Huh?
I think part of it is too. And this is something that I figured out is there's also a big cultural difference between big city people and small town people as well.
What do you mean?
Right. So, because I think, for example, as the kind of, if you're a New Yorker, yes?
Yeah.
So I think the kind of, even though, we're both raised in the States, I think New York American culture is different from, for example, small town Michigan American culture.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So, and I think it's the same in Japan, that the Tokyo culture is very particular and it's very different from the culture of small town Japan, or even very different from Osaka's culture. Like you look at, like, for example, New York people, how people walk and talk and behave in New York versus LA, and there's big differences.
Okay.
Right. And you see the same thing within Japan. So when you're looking at these cultural differences, you also have to take into account the particular city that you're in as well. Like, for example, people in Tokyo are mad shy. People in Osaka aren't shy at all.
Okay.
Like they're super outgoing and just like it's perfectly easy to talk to strangers in Osaka, right?
I got to make a note of that. I got to stop in Osaka.
Yeah. Like one of the easiest, in Japan, it said the easiest way to know the difference between somebody from Tokyo and Osaka is if you walk up to a random person, you're like, bang, to somebody in Osaka, then they'll go, and they'll play along, right? If you do that to somebody in Tokyo, they'll look at you like, I don't know you. Who are you? You know what I mean? Like that's how you tell the difference between Osaka and Tokyo. Anybody in Osaka will just kind of like, they'll play along with the joke.
I'm gonna do that in Harlem and see if I can survive that. Bang. No, but okay. But again, you're married to a Japanese woman, even though she is very comfortable with the American culture. So assimilating to a relationship with you probably wasn't that difficult, but her parents aren't American.
Yeah.
So what was it like meeting her family as a black man living in Japan, meeting your Japanese wife's family?
Oh man, that was raw. That was really raw.
Really? What happened?
Her father straight up told me no. Like the first 2 times I said I was going to marry her. He was like, all right. I was like, yeah, so I'd like to marry your daughter. And he's like, nope.
Just like that?
And I was like, yeah. And he's like, nope, not going to let that happen. And then my wife was just like, just come back and try again later, So, and then eventually he figured out that like, I'm not going to go away. So he's like, all right.
How many times did it take for you to keep going back?
It took, I think I got it on it was the second or third time, But just the fact that like, I'm kind of like, bro, I'm just going to do it anyway, right? So I'm asking just to be polite and out of respect. So I'm just going to do it anyway. I'm not going to let you just shoot me down. Was it because he saw you as this black man or because you weren't Japanese? It was, I don't know. Could be either one, but he's like, first of all, you're a foreigner. You don't speak Japanese very well. You're an actor, so you don't have a regular job. So not happening, right? And then, yeah, him and I, we've had some nasty headbutts.
Has he ever been disrespectful to you?
Oh yeah.
Like what has he done? What has your wife's father done to you?
So we're family. So I'm not gonna get into that. But we've been through some pretty raw stuff. But at this point, I have his respect, and I've earned it honestly.
Okay.
And he really respects the fact that I earned his respect honestly.
Okay.
And at this point, he really, really respects me. So, but I mean, yeah, we went through some real nasty stuff to get there. So I'm sorry that I don't really want to talk about it, but it's just because
I get it. I listen. It was an opportunity to learn your experience, and I get that it's a personal thing and completely respectful. But what about on the other end of the spectrum, like your family? How was your family receiving of your Japanese wife?
Oh, my family was totally cool. They love her.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because they hadn't been abroad before. Well, I mean, a lot of my family had traveled abroad, but they didn't get a lot of the quirks about her personality aren't necessarily her. It was just the culture that she comes from.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and so they would be like, well, why is she doing this? Or why is she doing that? And it's just because of the culture that she comes from. It isn't necessarily her.
Yeah.
And that was something, it was a growth process. But, I mean, and like, no marriage is perfect. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has drama within their family. Everybody has, if it's a real marriage, then people have problems. You know what I mean? Like that's just, you can't spend so much time with any one person without eventually finding out things that you don't necessarily like, or finding out that you have values that are very, very different, especially when it gets to raising kids, because then she's got this whole concept of how she was raised. I have this whole concept of how I was raised. A lot of them are like diametrically opposed, but for us, the way that we were raised was the right way to raise a child. You know what I'm saying? So
to each of you individually, that's your perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have kids. How many kids do you have?
I just got one. I got one little boy who looks exactly like me, except that he's Asian.
Okay.
He's got exactly the same face. Like it's
the same face, but he's Asian. So
yeah, but he's light skinned. He has some slight epicanthal folds around his eyes, and he has perfectly straight hair. But other than that, he has exactly the same face. It's the craziest thing ever.
But let me ask you a question. So you mentioned that your wife, who's Japanese, and yourself, who's from Detroit, probably had some like butting head moments of how to raise your child, right?
Yeah.
Give me some examples of like some upbringing challenges you had based on your experience growing up as a child, or in your community and her community, that was very opposing in how you were raising your child together.
Well, one of the things that we go back and forth about a lot is which language do we make his first language?
Ooh.
Because right now he's perfectly bilingual.
Okay.
And that's very, very hard to do. So we're both very proud of the fact that he's native in both languages. That's really hard.
But English just through you though.
Through me, and then also because I would fly him back home, a few times every year to spend time with family in the States. So he's in a completely English environment. My taekwondo school that I run in an area called Roppongi. Yeah. It's in a large expatriate community. So it's all expat kids. So it's all international kids. So everybody speaks English. We do everything. I've worked very, very hard to keep him in at least 50% of the time in an English speaking environment. Right. But that's one thing, is like, all right, how do we handle the language? Does he go to a regular Japanese school, or does he go to an international school? So, and then how do we find that balance between, because one of the things that I love about America is America's all about, like I said, individual freedom, and then creativity and finding your own way to do things, and like unapologetically being you.
Trailblazer.
Like that's very American, and I love that about America, right?
Yeah.
In Japan, it's all about social harmony, which generally means you can't unapologetically be you, because you have to compromise for the sake of social harmony.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, how do we find the balance there? Right. Is the question. So,
but how? Okay, so you have a child that you guys are, negotiating how to raise. How old is your child?
he's 6.
He's 6 years old, and he's got a lot of growing to do. And there's so many different directions it could go, given your perspective and your wife, who's Japanese. She has a million ways that she can go with it as well. But what about the community as a whole? How does the community receive your child, who's both, I guess, a melanated, for lack of a better word, black man or black boy, who's
he's also like a foot taller than everybody else too. So
okay, right?
So that's really right.
So living in Japan as a child who's coming from a parent who's from Detroit and a mother who's Japanese, what is it that your child experiences?
So far, we haven't had any issues with anybody because he goes to a regular Japanese school because we wanted him to go to a Japanese school first because the Japanese written language is so much harder than the English written language. Shocking. Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Three different alphabets, one of which has like 20,000 characters, right? So we thought, okay, well, he should go to school for Japanese because that's the harder language to learn, the harder written language to learn.
Yeah.
So he's going to an all Japanese school, and so far so good. I never want him to be picked on because he was the kid that's different.
Okay.
So at his school, I just made sure that like everybody knows Ty's dad and everybody likes Ty's dad. You know what I mean? Like all the teachers like me there, and then like all the little kids, like they know that I'm Ty's daddy. Right. And then like,
is it because they know based on what you look like, or because you made yourself like known there?
It's because, I mean, obviously I stand out like a sore thumb when I walk in, like everybody knows when they look at him, they look at me again, same face too. Right.
Yeah.
But also I worked very hard to make sure that everybody in his school knows that Ty's daddy is different, but Ty's daddy's really cool too. You know what I mean? So as to give them a very positive preconception of how of foreign people, because these are children, right? Like a lot of them, I'm the first foreign person they've ever met, so I want them to think foreigners are I want them to just have to view people that are different as a positive thing, instead of as a negative thing. So I work really hard to make sure all the kids in the school like Ty's daddy.
I really like what you said there, because it kind of comes full circle what you said at the beginning of the conversation, which is, as a, for lack of a better word, black man living in Japan, you get to create your own narrative of who you are without having to piggyback off of what America thinks of you through the history of what they've seen on TV, or the isolated incidents that they've experienced. To be able to raise your child in a community where you can write his own history, write his own story that is positive in the community that surrounds him. I think that's a very, very, very powerful thing. And
Thank you.
I'm very appreciative of being able to hear those stories.
Thank you. And like what I hope is you'll have these kids when they're in their 20s and their 30s, then they'll be able to, when they see somebody that's different, there won't be that like, oh my God, what is that? They'll be like, oh yeah. He's like Ty's dad. Ty's dad was super cool. I remember Ty's dad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want them to have that feeling. Because for me, like the first foreign country I ever went to was Korea. And my best friend in high school was Korean.
Yeah. So
I spent a large amount of my time around Koreans when I was young.
Yeah.
So for me, even though I don't speak Korean well anymore because I haven't, my Korean lexicon's been completely replaced with Japanese. I still speak a little bit. I can still read emails and respond to emails and things, but my speaking is not there anymore.
Okay.
But even so, hearing Korean language feels very warm to me because that was the language of my best friend. You know what I mean? And like seeing Korean faces generally makes me feel happy because it reminds me of those childhood experiences with my best friend. And it reminds me of my experiences doing Taekwondo in Korea and all that. Right.
Okay.
So,
well, that's good.
Yeah. So I'd like those kids to have that same feeling with me, as they get older and they become adults and then they're making decisions and they're voting and all that other stuff,
So all this experience you've had in Japan, as a black man living in Japan, you gone through all the culture shock, you married a Japanese woman, you have like a very beautiful child that now lives in Japan, who's going to be part of this next generation of humans in that community that is creating some level of diversity in culture.